Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vicki Janowski with the Greater Wilmington Business Journal. Welcome to this week's WilmingtonBiz Talk. This week, we're talking about cybersecurity concerns and an increased awareness of the potential for cyber attacks because of the situation in Russia and Ukraine. Today, we have a couple of experts, not only in cyber defense area, but also in the business IT end of that, and talking about how businesses can start thinking about protecting themselves right now as we're seeing these developments happen. But first, before we jump into the conversation, we're going to hear a quick word from our sponsors, Cape Fear Realtors. And if you have any questions for our panelists as we have this next 15 to 20 minute talk, feel free to put them into the comments on the Facebook stream, and I'll keep an eye out for them and pass them along as we have our discussion. But before we launch into it, here's a word from Cape Fear Realtors.
Hello, I'm Ann Gardner, CEO of Cape Fear Realtors. Realtors support this program's efforts to connect our community in meaningful dialogue with actionable insights. Realtors are dedicated professionals who build strong, resilient communities and businesses. Work with someone you can trust. Work with a realtor. Learn more at capefear.realtor.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's WilmingtonBiz Talk put on by the Greater Wilmington Business Journal. This week, we wanted to talk about cybersecurity and the threat of cyber attacks, particularly because the Biden administration just last week put out some new warnings about the potential for such attacks to be happening in connection to the war in Ukraine and with Ukraine and Russia. So in light of that, and because there's been additional cautionary warnings, I think, put out for the business community and critical infrastructure organizations nationally, and even that trickles down to the local level, we wanted to invite a couple of experts from UNCW on cybersecurity, and that is Dr. Ulku Clark from UNCW Center for Cyber Defense Education, where she's the director, and she's also a professor of information systems for Cameron School of Business, is joined by with Geoff Stoker, who's also at UNCW and teaches cybersecurity and information security management. Jerry Tomlinson, who owns Enfuse Technology Solutions, is going to join us and share some tips for those small and medium-sized businesses and what they should be thinking of right now, but also in the future when it comes to shoring up their defense of their IT networks. So thank you all for joining us today. And again, if you have questions, you can put it in the chat box there and I'll pass them along. But Ulku, could you start us off along with Geoff maybe and give us a primer, a broad level look at why are we talking about this right now, in particular with the conflict with Ukraine and Russia?
Sure, Vicki, thanks for having us here today. I think what is happening is not really news because Russia has been, along with China and a couple of other countries, has been a strong player in the cyber area. They have been, in the offensive cybersecurity, maybe past 20 years or so. We have been hearing their attacks more and more quite, frequently recently with the colonial pipeline and other type of attacks. And why is this different for us, for regular people? I think, we are all carried away with the ransomware attacks, and then we are not very familiar with the advanced persistent attacks. So advanced persistent threats are kind of the attacks that state nations do against other countries. And the difference between APTs and the other type of cyber crime is the other cyber crime is done by hackers or cyber criminals that have limited resources. But when you talk about the state nations, they have really almost unlimited resources. They have financially unlimited resources. They have, of course, the number of hours they can put in these type of attacks is unlimited. And of course, the type of encryption they can come up with, all of those are somewhat very high threat levels. So with that, we see that Russia has been in this business for a long time, along with the other, of course, strong cybersecurity actors. And in Russia, they have multiple government agencies that focus on both offensive and defensive side. On the offensive side, we see all these cyber attacks going on with the advanced persistent threats, but in addition, they do disinformation, misinformation type of attacks to their adversaries. And internally, they are protecting their networks from these type of attacks, but then they don't only call this as cyber security, they call this information security because they are not doing it on their digital assets, but they also do it for the disinformation, misinformation by content filtering as well. So I want to pass it to Geoff if he has anything to add.
Thanks, Ulku. Yeah, and thanks, Vicki. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk to your listeners. So I'll just echo a little bit of what Ulku said. I think it's helpful for people to begin to understand that while there are times where we're going to hear leaders or we're going to hear businesses bring cybersecurity to the forefront, and I think it's a good thing for it to periodically kind of come up, you know, the cybersecurity landscape can be thought of as kind of a war where there is no longer any peacetime. You know, it's not like we're at war now and then a war ends and now we're at peace and then war kicks up again. It's really constant, it's ongoing. And I don't know if this analogy will resonate with everyone, but I was thinking about it recently, and maybe the way we think about safety as related to vehicles might be helpful, right? So it's been about 110 years in the United States that we've been all driving vehicles around. And if you go back and look at the data, you know, there were between 20 and 30 deaths per 100 million miles driven on the road when we first started with cars. And then we slowly learned things like seatbelts and speed limits and crumple zones and so forth and so on. And, you know, to the point now, 110 years later, you know, there's roughly about one death every 85 million miles. So we've made, you know, great strides in the cybersecurity realm with so many people and so many businesses online. I think it's more like we're in these early days, right? There's things that people are doing that are very bad. You know, the equivalent of driving without a seatbelt, the equivalent of speeding in the rain. People don't really have it internalized yet how dangerous some of these things are. And so that's why on one hand, it's always ongoing. People are always looking to get you online. And so there's nothing particularly new, but then also it is good once in a while for a leader to stand up and say, hey, let's refocus some attention there.
And then let's talk about what that means for us on an individual level, or, you know, just even on local impact levels. And Jeremy, maybe you can talk to what you've seen in terms of with your clients, what happens after, you know, a ransomware attack comes in. So even though that, and so I wanted to throw out a stat that came out from the Homeland Security last year, and again, different than what we're talking about right now, maybe in terms of the advanced system threats, but Homeland Security Secretary estimated last year that 1/2 to 3/4 of ransomware victims were small businesses. So this is a very international topic that we're discussing, but can come down to your individual level. So Jeremy, what do you see when you're working with people in the area in terms of, you know, what the impacts can be to their business if they go through malware or ransomware incident?
Sure, yeah. So by far for small and medium businesses, the biggest threat is the ransomware, probably equal to the spear phishing campaigns that can be done. But sort of what I've seen is it really doesn't matter if you're a 2-person business or if you have 100 employees. I had they became a client. They were an extremely small nonprofit, and who would have thought, you know, why would anyone be interested in them for ransomware? But they definitely got hit with it, and pretty much, you know, had to start from scratch. I was working with them to work from some backups and things, but that is definitely the biggest persistent threat that I come across, and that's how I spend most of my time protecting against.
So for anyone to jump on in there, whether it is just a small business owner or even like what some of the larger institutions in the banking industry or healthcare facilities are probably talking about right now, what is it that people should be doing or should be thinking about for best practices then?
So there's something called basic cyber hygiene. So I think at the individual level, it is great for people to learn about basic cyber hygiene. which is, paying attention to your passwords, paying attention to basic things that you need to do. And small, medium-sized businesses are, of course, like the main concern, because about 98-99% of all US businesses are small, medium-sized businesses. And most of the time, unfortunately, they do not have the IT or security staff to make sure that, these safeguards are taken, and, like the networks are protected and their people are trained. So for that reason, there's something called 18 CIS critical security controls. The companies probably should familiarize themselves with those controls. And then if they don't have the capability, maybe hire someone like Jeremy to do their managed service provider services, so they could provide them these type of services.
Yeah, if I could, I'll just continue on with that thought. The way we have learned to drive vehicles, we don't say, oh, this is a safe drive, this is a safe vehicle, this is an unsafe vehicle. There's kind of degrees of safety, right? There's degrees of how safely you are driving. Are you driving without a seatbelt? Are you speeding? Is the weather bad? And different people have a great deal of control over their own risk that they choose to assume by doing things like buckling their seatbelt, by taking their vehicle to a garage periodically to have the brakes checked, by checking the tires to make sure the tread depth. So there are, I would argue, equivalents over in the cybersecurity world. Do you have strong passwords? Do you use multi-factor authentication? Do you regularly update your antivirus? And I think as we go down this road, as people begin to assume more and more responsibility in conjunction with things like the government is, we all have to get our vehicles inspected in this state on a regular basis, right? I don't know if we'll get to a point where our computers have to be inspected before they're allowed on the internet, but hopefully you can kind of see the idea. Like there are things that I'm doing as an individual. There's things that the government is doing to try to help guide me to do smart things. And we're at the very beginning. We're trying to learn how to do this, to operate more securely, or at least understand what risks you're taking when you choose, not to update your software or not to have an antivirus definition that's been updated.
I really like your analogy. I'm going to steal that. The whole car thing between the seatbelts and airbags and everything else is that's one of the biggest things I talk about is layers. You can firewall, endpoint protection, but the biggest one is education. Like, let's talk to your employees about what to look for in an email that may have some malfeasance in it and something that we're trying to block. And when someone comes to me, I'm always going to hit them with the most protection we can, and we have to talk together and figure out what fits their budget and exactly what they need. But definitely a layered approach, I think, is the best way to go.
And all three of you have spent time in this space and obviously follow it very closely. Geoff, I wanted to ask you specifically because of your time in the Army and serving as a chief information security officer and spending time in Afghanistan protecting coalition networks. I'm kind of curious, in your years in working with this, particularly, coming from the military standpoint and then in your private sector startup era, like what have you seen in terms of changing over the years for just the type of cybersecurity threats and attacks? Is it evolving? Are the people or the agents doing it, moving in new directions to make it more insidious, I guess?
Yeah, well, and so of course it's going to end up being both, right? There's this combination of, the more things change, the more things stay the same, right? Fundamentals are always helpful, and then thankfully, and hopefully I'm not beating this car thing to death, but seatbelts were a big deal. And I remember as a child back in the 70s, like, there were no seatbelts in the back seat, so people didn't even install them. But then as the industry gets smarter, they started adding some things, right? And then I appreciate Jeremy mentioning airbags, which hadn't come to my mind. Like that was a huge innovation when airbags got added. So on the cybersecurity side, one of the biggest changes over time has been things like the first group of people trying to get the internet to work were very cooperative, right? They were all a bunch of engineers, like, we just want to make this work. And there wasn't a lot of thought about, well, someone might come and abuse your good nature. And so things were very permissive, right? It was, let's permit everything. And then if something bad happens, let's block it. And now pretty universally, I'll speak to firewalls. Now it's flipped. It's like, we're going to block everything. And then one by one, we're going to allow things that we know need to come through. But the default is going to be, we're going to default to being more secure. We're going to default to not allowing things through. And then, Jeremy already mentioned layers. This is no longer just happening like you have one firewall somewhere in your network. There's potentially, a firewall before you get to the real internet. Then there's a firewall after your DMZ before, protect your internal assets. Then you have a host-based firewall on your computer itself. And people are beginning to become aware of these things, although they likely don't know exactly what they are. And I'll just pause because I don't want to talk too much more.
Well, Jeremy, I was going to ask you, I'm curious about, since you do deal with a lot of the businesses and business owners, what are some of your thoughts about why there's so many vulnerabilities in that area? Is it a function of just awareness has been slow, or attention to that? Because obviously, as you know, small and medium-sized business owners are being pulled in so many different directions. Why do you think just this particular level of enterprise and entrepreneurs tend to be more vulnerable?
I think a lot of people put their IT and security budget at a lower level than even maybe their marketing budget, and so not having an internal person or an external that comes in and says, "Hey, all my Windows computers are updated to the latest patches," and which is probably the largest vulnerability we have, is not keeping those updated, and that's where a lot of these exploits come from. So someone that is checking that, whether it's an employee or an outside company, as well as making sure that they just have some sort of antivirus, and just going through and checking as many boxes as you can. I think that is the biggest reason for issues with small businesses.
And Ulku, going forward, where do you think in terms of, does it seem to be improving in terms of technology for preventing some of this, particularly when we think of like the larger scale of threats? Does it still feel like a whack-a-mole system, or does it seem like the industry is moving ahead and kind of getting better at protecting against future system threats?
We talked about Business Week before we started the meeting. So yesterday in the Business Week, I told the students that about 15 years ago, when I started teaching, we were trying to sell the students, hey, learning about technology is important because technology is pervasive. It's going to be in everywhere. And now we don't really have to sell that. But it is the same thing with cybersecurity. I think, down the road, a few years down the road, everyone is going to understand the, importance of learning, implementing, practicing it. I think, the latest attacks like that Colonial Pipeline, everyone was all of a sudden, wait a minute, it's not like related to only technology people. It impacts my daily life. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fill my car with gas and be able to pick up my child from school. With all of those daily impacts, I think everyone is nowadays understanding it. Also at the government level, at the moment there's thing called CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is making sure that the supply chains are secure for the defense industrial base partners, because most of the attacks that happened towards DoD partners came from the mostly small, medium-sized businesses that were partnering with the large DoD, contractors. So for that reason, they are doing 3 levels of security. So the cyber hygiene is the level 1, and I think what I foresee is in the future, this is going to be pushed to all small, medium-sized businesses, because that is going to be important and essential for the national security, not only for DoD type of security. In addition, of course, we are trying to get education for cybersecurity awareness through our educational programs. CCD also offers a lot of workshops, conferences to increase the awareness of the community. Some of these are entry level, some of these are more advanced level, some of these are technical, and then even if you don't have any background, you would still be able to follow all these different things. So I would encourage the community members to consider attending those events, and then if they have kids or if they would like to take some of our classes, we are all into educating the community on these new things going on.
And also, I guess looking forward, you are also part of a $2 million grant that UNCW is involved with, but that money is going for a statewide coalition. Let me make sure I get this correct, but from Cybersecurity Center within NSA. Can you tell us just like real quickly a little bit about that and what that's going to mean in terms of finding new solutions?
Absolutely. So UNCW has a designation from NSA and DHS in Center of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense Education. And there are a couple of other schools in North Carolina. So 8 of these schools, partnered together, formed a coalition called NC-PACE. And NC-PACE was awarded $2 million by NSA to improve North Carolina economy through cybersecurity related, activities. Some of these activities involve research. The others are, we are working with North Carolina Business Development Center to develop CMMC workshops to, bring the IB partners up to speed and help them because, most of the time the partners, especially small, medium-sized businesses, are impacted by the assessment cost, preparedness, and all that stuff. So we want to help, these little small companies with the, assistance of our students. And in addition, we have programs like reverse internship, various other programs going on under NC-PACE. Yeah.
Okay, and just for a takeaway, you mentioned cybersecurity, hygiene earlier. What's one thing that you each think that someone should do today to make sure that they are doing a better job, either individually or as a business? Jeremy, you want to start us off?
Check your Windows updates.
So every time you get that nagging notification, you really do have to do it?
That would be great.
Geoff?
So I'm going to go with the access control. So do not reuse your passwords. Do not reuse your passwords. Do not reuse your passwords.
Okay, everyone's making me feel really lazy right now. Apparently I have a lot of work to do as well. Ulku, can you finish us off then? What's one tip we should all be doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage everyone to check the, CIS controls, those 18 critical controls, but the number one is inventory of your assets, digital assets, because if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it.
Right, especially if it goes away, right? And then you're lost. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for these great tips and also just going over just the broader view of what we're looking at both right now, but going into the future when it comes to cybersecurity. I'm sure it's going to be an ongoing topic, and we'd love to have you guys back on again too to touch base later. And thanks to all of you who have tuned in and are watching. If you want to catch up on previous discussions from our Wilmington Biz Talk, you can go to WilmingtonBizTalk.com, or you can look on your favorite podcast streaming platform and you'll find them there as well. We'll have this video and the links to it in our afternoon email today at 4 for our daily newsletter. And we hope to see you guys all here again next week. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Vicky.